Healing usually shows itself when you're not watching for it. It shows up in the moments when something familiar changes shape. A reaction doesn't rise the way it usually does. A spike never shows up. A crash starts to form, but then it loses ground. These are quiet shifts, and they don't match the dramatic turning point that people expect. The body tends to reveal progress long before the mind actually believes it. One of the early signs is the way the system responds to a stressor that it used to overreact to. You feel the beginning of that old pattern, but it doesn't gather that same momentum. It fades halfway through instead of carrying you into that full response. There's no announcement, just a softer edge where there used to be a hard line. Crashes begin to change too. They still threaten, but they don't pull the entire system down. You feel the dip, but the bottom doesn't drop out. The crash tries to form in the way it always has, but then it stalls. People often overlook this because the crash hasn't disappeared. It's simply losing force, but that shift matters. Sleep can reveal healing in ways nothing else does. The nervous system leaves clues at night. A familiar early morning waking may stop showing up. The jolt that used to follow a noise or a thought suddenly doesn't happen. Or you fall back asleep instead of launching into alertness. These moments look minimal from the outside, but they're some of the clearest signs that the system is beginning to repair itself. Now, as the healing continues, symptoms start behaving differently in 3 ways. They show up with less intensity, they happen less often, and they don't linger as long. Most people don't recognize this right away because the symptoms still exist, but the shape of the symptom changes. Something that used to take half a day to settle now resolves in an hour. Something that used to flare every morning skips mornings here and there. Now, if you see yourself in any of this, make sure you subscribe. I release new videos every week that go deeper into these patterns and what they mean for your physiology as it begins to repair. There's also a shift in functional capacity that gives healing away. You might realize you made it further into the day before the fatigue caught you, or you handled a conversation that you normally would avoid because it was too draining, and you notice you're not as depleted afterwards. Maybe you walk through the grocery store and you reach the checkout line before that familiar, I'm done feeling appears. These are small changes, but they're unmistakable once you notice them. The system starts returning energy instead of draining it at every turn. Now, another subtle sign that shows up in how the body spends that energy. Tasks that usually empty the tank, they don't take as much. The body begins holding a little more reserve, and it's not a dramatic increase in the beginning. It's the moment when you finish something and you realize you're still present, still thinking, still able to continue. Healing often shows up in that leftover bit of strength that you're not used to having. And then there's the moments when the body simply refuses to repeat an old pattern. A jolt that used to shoot straight through you stops early. A flare that used to dominate the afternoon never takes hold. A stressor hits, and something inside steps in before that spiral begins. Most people notice this later, when they realize an entire episode failed to happen. Healing doesn't announce itself with a clear turning point. There's no corner to turn when healing from this thing. Healing shows itself in the gaps. Those small, quiet places where the body does something different than it used to. Those are the moments that matter. Those are the small wins.